Hello everyone. Continuing with our theme of a virtual Tucson, since the Tucson shows have either been canceled or postponed, I'd like to talk more about another subject I talk a lot about when speaking with clients. And to me, it's a really fascinating subject. If it doesn't fascinate you, then you don't have to watch the video. But I often talk about adapting the cut to the rough and how a lot of the enjoyment I get out of cutting is taking a specific piece of rough and examining it really, really carefully and working it gradually into what I want it to be. And many people ask me, do I see a piece of rough and know immediately what it's going to be? Like some Zen moment or something. And the reality is, most of the time, that's not how it works. Most of the time, I know it's a beautiful piece of rough. It's a gorgeous piece of rough. I know it has awesome potential. I have some idea of what I want it to be, but many times that plan changes as the cutting progresses. And to me, natural gem rough is rare. Let's start right away with looking at some gem rough here. Here we have some rough from Madagascar, some Madagascar Sapphires. And here we have on the left-hand side what they look like as rough, how I bought them. And this rough is the product of months of labor, of digging. No, obviously not my labor. Somebody else dug it, and many somebody else's in this case, dug for these gems. And to find a gem that will even cut, gem rough, that will even cut 1 carat in size in the field is a pretty large piece of gem rough and an exciting find for the miners. So to me, as I am the next step down along the line from miner to consumer, to me it's important that I honor the rough, that I respect how much labor and care was involved in extracting it, and don't just chop it up any old way I want to, but that I try is to maximize the beauty, to make the rough into the best gem I can, the most beautiful gem. And that involves a lot of different stuff. It involves the choice of the cutting style to be appropriate for the color, the clarity, the shape of the rough. It involves the shape of the stone from the rough. And many times, as you can see here, that's rather surprising. Number 1, for example, was this blue rough. And I guess you can kind of see a pear-shaped shape in there if you realize that this wing was really thin, but it turned into a pear shape. And then number 2, that number 2 wasn't much of a surprise at all. You can kind of see a slightly bowed diamond shape there, and it's exactly what it turned into. Number 3 was a little bit more of an indiscriminate shape, and that turned into an oval. Once again, this is rough, and this is what is called a preform. And so once I start working on these gems, what I do is I take this rough and freehand I grind on it. I hold it against a grinding wheel and strategically grind off what I don't want to be part of the finished gem to make the shape of the gem I want to end up with. And here is another gem, here, another rough, another blue sapphire. And that ended up being a cushion shape. And you can see that it got significantly smaller. And why was that? Well, partly because of this divot in here, but probably partly because of inclusions. So while ideally I would like to make the largest gem possible, I also feel that it is important not to just make a big gem. It's important to make a beautiful gem. So oftentimes I think that the best use of the rough isn't always the biggest stone. It's the one with that overall has the most appeal to it. This one, here's another one, not much of a surprise there. That's number 5, it's a round. But look at this, number 6. Look at the shape of that relative to the shape of the preform. I mean, it had inclusions going on there, so the preform ended up a radically different shape than the rough. And number 8, look at number 8. I mean, you'd never expect that. Examining the rough, maybe you can get a little bit of that idea if you really look carefully and found inclusions in different things. But that's where we went from there. Number 10 is fairly logical. Number 11, look, I mean, that, to me, looking at the rough, it looks more rounded. But when I got into it and grinding and removing stuff that we didn't want, it ended up being a slightly skinny oval, which is unexpected. Number 13, don't look too closely at that one because I didn't do much to it. I found out it had too many rutile needles in it, and it needed heating, so I left it as rough. But this, to me, this is interesting, and this is the first step. It's a process of discovery, and this is the first step in that process, is grinding from rough to preform. And here's another lot of rough. This is Australian sapphires, and this is the same rough as went into these preforms. Obviously, this is more zoomed in than this is, because that's why it looks a lot smaller. But many fascinating and interesting preforms came out of this rough. But since I didn't lay it out numbered like I did with the other lot, even I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly which. Like this, I think this one is this trillion here. But in many cases, I wouldn't be able to tell you which of these roughs turned into which of these preforms. I suppose if I'm trying to impress everybody, that's not the best thing to say. But what I'm trying to emphasize is the unexpectedness of a lot of this. The need for flexibility, which I find is a constant while cutting and preforming. And recently I had an interesting example of this, which is what inspired me to make this video. Because what happens is after we preform the gems, after I preform the gems, then they're glued onto what's called a dop. And a dop is a cylinder, a brass cylinder usually, and the gemstone is adhered to the end of that dop with glue of some sort. There are many types of glues depending upon your preferences and what you're trying to accomplish. But glue it on a dop, and then you start cutting on it. And because it's glued on one side, you can only cut one side at a time. So my preference is to cut the bottom first, because the angles of the bottom of the gem are the most crucial. And the angles at the top of the gem are also important, but slightly less crucial than the angles on the bottom. So I start with what I feel is most critical and work my way from there. And once you've done the one side, then there's a process called transferring, where you put two dops with a stone in the middle. And I've got another video on this on our website if you want to see that. I'll try to on the home page. It's currently on the home page towards the bottom. It's how gems are cut. So it's johndyergems.com. All the way towards the bottom of the page, there's a video called How Gems Are Cut, which will tell you more about that. But so when it's transferred, you put the two dops with a gem in the middle, and you glue it on the other side, and then you release carefully, you release the first side that was glued on and then work on the top. And so we were doing that recently with one of these gems, not one of the gems in the picture, but a gem. And here you can see the glue holding the gem on to the dop, and this is a real close-up. Let's see if I can bring it even closer, make it bigger for you. And surprises happen. One thing, since I don't want to lose a lot of material, sometimes purposefully I leave a few little divots or inclusions, and sometimes the divots or inclusions pop up unexpectedly. This was a gem we were cutting, and we cut the first row of the crown, and the pavilion of this is a Starbright style, so often I like a crown with sort of a double row of facets, so the top row of facets make a little frame around. So the original plan was to just follow the shape with a dual row of facets. But look what we found. We found a divot here. Here, let me draw to make this clearer. We have a divot right here. And we have another divot right here, which caused us to stop and think a while. Think, what are we going to do with this? You can just say, okay, this is my plan. I want to put two rows of facets on there. Got to make the whole thing smaller and make that work. But that's not the best way to do things, in my opinion, and not the funnest way either. To me, it's the interesting challenge of, okay, I've got this. Now, how can I deal with this and make this gem as beautiful as it would have been, or even more so? So, here, let's see, get this back down to size. Okay, so here's a top view of the same gem. Here you can sort of see the shape of it. It's sort of a Superman logo, or even a John Dyer logo shape. And you can see the extent of these white inclusions. And to get those out with the original plan of the two-step cut, you really have to take a lot of material away and make the gem smaller, or change the shape. But I like this shape, not not just because it's my own logo, but it's a shape other people like as well, and it's a shape that I find appealing. So here is the start of what my plan was. I decided to put a facet. You can see, hopefully you can see here. I'll outline it just so you can. Here, see this triangular facet? We started to put in a triangular facet here, and the idea with that is to remove those inclusions. As much as possible, we remove inclusions. Remove them, or make sure they're well hidden so they don't impact the beauty of the gem, except in some rare cases where they actually add to the beauty of the gem. But in this case, these are divots, and they would be unsightly. So this is the idea for starting to remove them. And there's an early step, and the facet was getting a little too far over in this side. Didn't want it going as far that side as it was going. So we changed indexes, which results in the facet being rotated further over in this direction. See how it's going farther this way? And cut further away. Now do you see how these inclusions are being eaten away? That's the goal. That's what we're aiming for. And here you see the facet really progressing well. You see you just have a little pocket here and here. And this, you can see the surface is rather rough of the gemstone. This is the cutting step, and often, this is a sapphire, often before polishing we'll have a pre-polish step. So there is still more gem going to be taken away at this point. Anyway, I hope you're finding all of this interesting, because this is probably, for my gem nerd aspect, something I really get into and think is interesting. But this is an illustration of adapting the cut to the rough, and hopefully will help explain why we have some of the policies we have as far as cutting to order and things like that. So here's a top view. You can see the facet we cut in. You can see this is the one we placed in to remove the inclusions. Now this is a symmetrical stone, so you put a facet just in one spot, it looks uglier than all get out. So you have to have a matching facet. This side had no offending inclusions, but for symmetry and for beauty needed a matching facet. If you're saying, wait a minute, those inclusions are still there, don't worry, they're gonna go away. So this is, I decided to do this gem in a program I have that allows me to do CAD mock-ups just to see what I like the idea. So this is the initial idea, a very rough approximation of the initial idea that we started. And this is the second step. Now these other facets, see this yellow facet and these other facets here, these are not necessary to remove any inclusions. They're not something we were obliged to do. But I did them for aesthetic reasons. I felt like if these two facets were the only facets that it had, it would look sort of out of place and strange. And so even though adding these other facets results in more work, more time spent, more material lost, to me, the overall effect that I was aiming for, which isn't this yet, you'll see further along, would be more appealing, would be more beautiful. So I added those facets there, and with the idea for the end result being this. See how it has the little frame around this is the table facet, the central facet, which is rather large and serves as sort of a window for, probably a window isn't a good term because that often means the light dumping through, but it's like a picture frame to frame the beautiful cut we did on the back. So, and this is like the edge of the frame right here. So I like this little facet around the edge. Another practical purpose that this little facet has is that since the table is flat and the side of the gem is somewhat steep, putting this little facet creates a much less sharp intersection between table and the facet beside it. And the result of that is this little junction at the top is much less likely to wear. When gems are worn in rings, unfortunately, they get bumped into things. So the sharper the points are, where it's likely to get bumped, and around the table is one of the most likely areas. The sharper the corners are, the more likely they are to suffer damage. So I feel like that this is not only a pleasing aesthetic choice, but it's a practical choice because it makes the gem less likely to be damaged. And so here is step number 2 in the actual gem being executed. You see some of the things in my CAD, I didn't bother to CAD in this wider point that we have on there. And these points, I'll point out. I'll point out the points. That's corny. But so here we have this point with a facet on it. And these points have little facets. The picture's a little fuzzy. It's hard to see. But the points on the girdle we put small facets on to make them less sharp, which makes the gem easier to set. Often these corners will be set with V-prongs or in bezels, and the sharper the corners are, the riskier it is to break them. So that's a major reason that we put little tiny facets on corners, which also takes longer but makes it less risky to set. If you're really perfectionistic like I am, you may notice that these little V's on the corner spread wider than in my rendering. That's because of the width of this point made the facet able to go down further and then grow out wider, which I don't think is a problem. But that's why the difference from the rendering to the actual gem. So in here we have the pre-polish stage, and this isn't fully polished. Also, if you're really anal like I am, you'll notice that this little meat point isn't perfect yet. That's going to be perfected in the final polish, but it shows you kind of the design we were aiming for. Because it's polished, it's transparent except for it reflects light, or pre-polished. It's shiny. It's going to get shinier yet. But this was the end plan, and from a gem nerd cutter perspective, I got excited about this. I liked this. I thought this was cool. And it's what I try to do with each gem. I try to adapt the cut and often adapt it on the fly as I'm going along to best display the inner beauty of the gem. Now, unfortunately, this was really recently, and I don't even have the finished gem to show you yet. But this is the idea behind our cutting to the rough. And I know that a lot of people, I get a lot of questions. Will you cut my rough? Just to answer that question right here, we're too busy with our own work to cut rough for other people. If needed, we can refer you to somebody else for that purpose. But whenever possible, I recommend that you buy a gem that is already cut and well cut, because there are all kinds of surprises during the cutting process. And many times, buying a rough and then having it cut, you're not going to end up with a gem that you totally love. Whereas if you buy a gem that's already cut, you can pick exactly the best gem for you, which is why we focus on cutting as many gems as we can and offering them on our website. Once again, that's John, John, Dyer, Dyer, gems.com, and offering those gems here. We've got it back here. JohnDyerGems.com. See that? So we focus on offering as many gems on our website as we can. We currently have, I think it's 12 or 1,300 gems. So there are a lot of things you can choose from to find exactly the gem that you love the most. And yeah, the results are like this. If you would like, you can find out more about this whole process through some other videos that we've made. If you go to YouTube and do a search for John Dyer gems preforming, you can see a video on preforming an Australian sapphire, which you can sort of see the preview of the video here. It's me preforming a large Australian Sapphire, and it shows start to finish. You can also grinding ametrine. There's another video if you want to even see the further back in the process. There's another video which my father made talking about grinding this ametrine rough and how we strategically grind it to remove inclusions, and a lot of interesting details about that process. So if you really want to take a deep dive into that subject, you can check out those things. And if you want to see how the gems turn out when they're finished, another good video to see, good versus bad gem cutting, how to tell the difference. That's another one of our videos. But once the gems are finished, then of course they're beautiful, and that's as beautiful as we can make them. And that's the goal, and that's when I feel happy, is when I feel like the gem is as beautiful as it could have been. And thanks for watching. If you want to see anything more, check out YouTube, check out our website, JohnDyerGems.com,